Hello, I'm Penny Lave, Los Altos Mayor and your guest host of the Los Altos History Show this evening. We're going to be discussing some of the recent events revolving around the City of Los Altos' 40th anniversary. With me is Paul Nyberg, Los Alton, member of the Chamber of Commerce Economic Development Committee and a library commissioner. Paul is a publisher. He started his career in Chicago and moved to California in 1974. In 1984, he and his wife, Liz, founded Select Communications. Select publishes local magazines, including Homes and Land Magazine, Renter's Digest, and Designers Illustrated. Paul volunteered to manage, edit, and publish the book, Los Altos, Portrait of a Community, that was sponsored by Los Altos Tomorrow, a community foundation. Paul, welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Penny. It's good to be here.
Thanks. Before we launch into our discussion of the anniversary, and especially the book, I promised Roy Lave, who's president of the foundation, that I would at least give Los Altos Tomorrow a mention. Los Altos Tomorrow is a community foundation established to build community and to enhance the quality of life in Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. Los Altos Tomorrow tries to identify and undertake projects that would otherwise go undone. The publishing of Los Altos Portrait of a Community was such a project, and the first major one undertaken by LAT. I want to thank all of the authors who volunteered on this effort, but especially thank Paul, who managed and coordinated the project. Paul, the book is beautiful and a tremendous addition to the history of Los Altos. Now that it's finished, what was the greatest challenge?
Well, there were several. I think the first one was to try to decide what should be contained in a book like this. We really didn't have a model for it for a small town, relatively small town like Los Altos, but we came up with an outline for it and then decided to use volunteer writers to coordinate and gather all the material to be in the book. And so then the second challenge was to get them all going in about the same direction, so we'd end up with some similarity in the different chapters, and that did work out. Probably the next biggest challenge was to figure out what not to put in, because there is so much that could be in a book, and we did have a limitation on the number of pages that we actually could print.
Well, you learned to be a nagger. I've done that for many years, but you probably had to learn it all over again. Let's look at the book. Will you share some of its contents with our viewers?
Well, the book starts with the first chapter is called the Roots of Los Altos, kind of looking back at where the community started from, and then it moves quickly into why the city was located here, which we'll talk about in a second, and then goes through chapter by chapter the various functions that go on in our community like this, the history of the schools, the churches, businesses, the retail development, and the social clubs and so on, and it basically covers the whole century. We found that we had to go back, even though it's a 40th anniversary book, we had to go back to the beginning of this century to tell the true story about Los Altos, and that's where it starts.
Well, so we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of Los Altos, but actually the town was founded much before that. And the railroad was a major contribution to that, wasn't it? You
know, most cities, if you look at a map anywhere in the world, or particularly in this country, were founded somewhere related to transportation, and usually it was rivers or the ocean. New York is on a great harbor on the ocean, and St. Paul is and Minneapolis is on a river, and so on. San Francisco is on the bay, which created a harbor, and Los Altos is on Adobe Creek. But that's not the real reason it was founded here. It really was the stream created of people by the railroad, in a sense. And it was the railroad coming here that made Los Altos be right where it is. And the founding fathers were railroad people from the Southern Pacific.
I see. You must have some favorite photographs. There's so many in the book. That's one of the wonderful things about the book. Could you share some of them with us?
Yes, I'd like to. Here's a large photo that we started off with, and this actually is the cover of the book, is taken from this photo, from a section of it. Also on the photo in the lower center part is the aerial overview of what is today the development along El Monte that was held up back in the early 70s because they discovered some remnants of some Maloney villages along that part of the creek. And so the actual city is built on remnants, or where villages were along the Adobe Creek, particularly, that was home to the Ohlone Indians. That's one of the pictures. Another picture that I like very much because it's so fascinating to try to understand what was going on. It was taken in 1951, and in the very center is this rather large collection of cars, and in 1951 nobody has really figured out what they were all doing in this one photo. This is at Pink Horse Ranch, and in the lower right-hand corner is this bare spot in the photo is where Foothill College is today. In fact, where we're sitting in the studio here is probably where this tree is. And there are about 500 or 600 cars here. We can't figure out what all the people are doing, but they obviously were having a good time. And Los Altons have had a good time over the years doing many things. Another one of my favorite pictures is a small 8x10 print, which we will try to show on the camera. This is really my favorite picture in the whole book. It's a picture of Raphael Myers when he was 14 years old. He lived with his family on Almond and San Antonio Road. His father was a physician and had built a large home there. On his 14th birthday, he was given this car by his mother, and he was going to military school. Raphael still lives in Palo Alto. He's retired, a NASA engineer. Another couple other pictures that I want to show you quickly. One is another favorite, which doesn't show a whole lot, except it was the one and only factory that we ever had in Los Altos. And they made a walnut huller that was invented here, and it's called the Formway Walnut Huller. And that factory was torn down not terribly long ago.
That was our industrial base.
That was the...
yeah. And actually, there still is a walnut huller on the porch at History House.
That's right, and it was made in that factory. This last one I'll just show you is what I call a bridge picture because of the people shown here. This is Paul Schaup, who was the founder of Los Altos, and in the same picture with him is a person who is living today and a very well-known retail merchant, and that's Sammy Kahn. And there they are together. This was taken in 1948 on Armed Forces Day and celebrating the founding of the United Nations in front of what was then the First National Bank, the first bank that opened in Los Altos. And these two people, one was here when it started, the other one is still here today, and I think that's rather an interesting picture to show.
The beginning of another great tradition of banks in Los Altos.
I guess so. The last one I will show is probably the favorite of many people, was Clint's ice cream store, which the building is still there today, and you might even comment on that, what's been done with that, Penny.
Well, the ice cream cone has been painted now to represent a window in a tower with a window box on it. But actually, I've been told that the boys, when that was an ice cream cone, used to go up behind the ice cream cone and smoke.
Well, I don't know about that. But Clint's was a fixture in the community, and I think no book on the history of Los Altos would have been complete without that.
That's right. Well, if you could paint a picture about Los Altos, how would it have changed?
Well, starting at the time of incorporation in the 1950s, you probably could easily find a parking space in the parking plaza, which was developed about that same time. A lot of the parking came in those years. Obviously, the number of cars that go up and down on San Antonio Road today has probably tripled from what it was back then. If you look at photos, and there are several photos in the book of aerials that, and I've enjoyed the aerials that we put in the book because they tell such a story, the change in geography and so on. In 1950, there were still lots and lots of orchards and lots of trees growing throughout the city, and now they've been almost all replaced with homes and with parking lots or streets or whatever. So what was once basically a big orchard is today a lot of houses.
Well, and Foothill Expressway wasn't where it is. The railroad
It was a railroad,
there,
that's right.
and 280 was gone, and it hadn't come yet. And
That's
actually,
right.
you have a picture in the book showing where 280 was supposed to be where Foothill Expressway is
Yes.
now.
It's a fascinating photo because the original schematic drawn by the engineers had various exits going right down into Main Street, and we would have these elevated ramps going all through our city, what ended up being the downtown.
Well, that's really interesting. One other thing I know that we had and came and left is the bucket at Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Oh.
But getting the children of Los Altos involved in the 40th celebration was an important component. The Historical Commission sponsors an essay contest every year for grades 3 through 6. And this year the theme was Time Capsule, which concentrated on what life was like 40 years ago. This year, over 280 children participated in the contest from all 6 elementary schools and 3 private schools. This contest was the very first event to kick off the Los Altos birthday party last spring. And then in November, the elementary school district provided a half-day field trip for the district's 3rd graders that included a walking tour of downtown, a tour of the History House Museum, and an exhibit of local artist Annie Knapp Fitz's paintings of Los Altos from her childhood memory. Annie shared with the 3rd graders some of her earliest memories of rural Los Altos, and she mentions well-known Los Altos landmarks, familiar to her as a child, and to our current 3rd graders as well. We were able to capture some of Annie's wonderful talent to communicate, along with Mary Edwardson, who coordinated the event. Let's roll that tape now.
In Santa Clara Valley. So they turned to growing flowers, really. And they did real well with the flowers.
And next to, along El Camino, neighboring the Knapp farm, were these plum orchards.
Yes, and there were 14 acres on each side of us with the prune or plum orchards. And in order to get our mail, we would go through 2 prune orchards. And if we didn't hear a car coming, when we got to El Camino, we would cross over, and there would be about 7 or 8 mailboxes. We would pick up our mail, turn around without looking or wondering, and cross back home. And don't try to do that now.
This painting shows the children working in the plum orchards, and they were very much an important part of the workforce in those days. This is yourself and one of your sisters.
My sister Katie and I.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our tank house in the distance. And this is the prune orchard in front of us, the 14 acres.
Santa Clara Valley was very well known. It was the largest producer of prunes in the world for a number of years. And so there were prune orchards, plum orchards all over the valley. Another fruit that we grew and was next door to Annie's farm is this fruit. Can you people guess which fruit it might be? Jennifer?
Apricot.
Apricots,
Peach.
that's right. It looks like peaches too, but it happens to be apricots. And here again, you see the children working in the orchards, don't you? They not only had to work at home on their own farm, but when the neighbors' fruit became ripe, they all had to go over, children and adults, and help pick so that it could be taken care of. In fact, you forgot to tell about the plum season. They didn't start school
Till after the prune plums were picked up. And it would be in September. So sometimes we started late in September, depending on how the fruit was doing.
But the apricots were harder to pick, and the work was harder.
They had to be sliced in half, and the seeds taken out and put on a tray, and then they had to be sulfured, and then all those trays had to be put outside in the sun. And sometimes it just took 3 or 4 days if it was real sunny, and other times if there wasn't much sun, it would take longer, depending on the weather.
I guess not. Charlie Traverso was the man who said, when the sun gets up, I get up, and when the sun goes down. So one of the streets was named after that landowner. Another landowner in that area was the Laux family, and you'll see the street named Laux running between San Antonio and Los Altos Avenue. And this is a painting of the Laux Ranch, and tell us about that. Tell us where it was located.
It's at the, you know where the village court is today?
Do you know where Chef Chu's is? Chinese
Yes.
food, many of us eat there. Well, it's in that vicinity, right across the street there where their other shops are.
And Laux, where Laux Avenue is, it was 35 acres of the Laux farm. And Mr. Laux would go up to Oregon and get the wild horses and have them put in the box cars for the railroad to take to Mayfield, which is South Palo Alto now. And they would open up the gates, and the cowboys or vaqueros would see, in those days no one was on El Camino, and they would herd those horses from Mayfield, South Palo Alto, to the village where the village court is today. And they would train them for the plow or for the surrey or whatever if they need to ride them. And they all had different personalities. Some couldn't be trained at all, and some were trainable. I think like people.
It's so important for children to be able to experience and relate to what life was like 70 years ago in Los Altos. So much has changed, but happily a lot has stayed the same, especially the ability of Los Altans to involve themselves in their community and to have a good time doing it. On December 5th, the birthday party was capped by a charity gala, and part of the gala was an anniversary follies written and performed by local Los Altans. This tradition goes back to the very beginnings of the town, when the Fathers Frolics raised money by taking part in theatrical productions. They raised money for the Los Altos Youth Center and for the Covington Pool. I think we have some evidence of that, don't we, Paul, in the book?
Yeah, we do have several pictures in the book of some of the theatrical developments and so on. There's a picture in here of the San Antonio Club, which was founded in 1904. And they met in the on San Antonio in a building that still is there. It's now not a youth center, but a preschool. And we have a picture in the book of their group in 1906, and they had a costume ball, and it was to celebrate the anniversary of the earthquake that had happened, and it was quite an interesting. It's called a topsy-turvy ball. Well, anyway, it's in the book. The Fathers Frolics. There are pictures in the book also about that, and it was a fundraising enterprise back then.
Well, Paul, what is your next challenge? What's the next book that you're going to write?
Well, as we said earlier, one of the things that was hardest in the book in some ways was to stop, because there's so much we could do. And some of us who've been involved with are talking about the 50th anniversary edition in 2002, I guess that would be. And we're starting to think ahead like that. One of the things that we hope will happen as a result of this book, and maybe even this video presentation, will be that those who have albums and photos and so on taken of their families way back would contribute those to the History House and help us build the accumulation of historical photos we have. Sometimes the smallest snapshot may be the only picture we have of a street or a part of the community that would be very important for others to see and to keep history. Another item that we highlighted, just mentioned in the book, was in the 1920s a movie was made in Los Altos by Los Altans. It was called Rebecca. And as far as we know, there is no copy of this film anywhere that we've been able to get our hands on. So if somebody listening to this program today has ever heard of it, have any idea where we might find it, it'd be great to have that. It was quite a story. It was all fictional, but it took place in Los Altos.
And it was a thriller.
It was a thriller, yes. It was a kidnapping.
Kidnapping.
Yes.
Well,
you'll have to read the next book to see what that was to find out what it was all about.
With that carrying on a tradition, we just did have a movie filmed in Los Altos last year, which was quite a thriller in itself.
Yes. Right.
Maybe not a kidnapping, but close to it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole year of the birthday celebration, because it was a a community project. It was something that many, many groups participated in. And the committee was formed of maybe 30 people from different organizations in Los Altos. And what we did was present them with a challenge to do what they could to celebrate Los Altos' birthday. You came up and met the challenge beautifully with a book. That was perhaps the biggest project.
Well, we appreciated your spearheading the whole thing, Penny, on behalf of the community, because probably most of it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't got the ball rolling. So.
Well, you have to carry on the tradition. We have a lot of traditions in Los Altos, the grad night tradition, and you always have to do it a little bit better.
Right.
And we had a birthday celebration on the 30th anniversary and one on the 35th, and it was just appropriate that we should do so on the 40th. But I think somebody else can do the one on the 45th and the 50th. Anyway, we had a lot of groups. Kiwanis was a part of it, Rotary was a part of it, the Quota Club was a part of it, and there were celebrations all year long. People dedicated their events to the birthday. The Follies was especially fun. I've wanted to do a Follies in Los Altos for many years, and this was really the time to get it done.
Are you going to repeat it?
I would love to repeat
to continue it.
Yes, now that I know that we have such talent, and the people who wrote the songs and the people who performed them did it so beautifully, I wouldn't have had to nag and worry for all those months thinking that it might not get done, because we have talent left over, and we can certainly do another one next year. It may not be as good, but it may be better. I want to thank Paul Nyberg for joining us this evening. I've enjoyed guest hosting this show, and thank you as well to our viewers for watching the Los Altos History Show. We've put together a digest of clips from the gala evening, including the Follies, that we will share with you. So until then, goodbye. We're looking forward to the next time, and thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Let's roll that tape.
Yes, welcome one and all to 40 years of history. Now, 40 is never, for those of us who have surpassed that birthday or are approaching it, it's never an easy birthday to approach. So we're going to try to make it a little more palatable by bringing you a history of Los Altos in song, written by Los Altons, performed by Los Altons, for Los Altons. A visit to Los Altos wouldn't be complete without a visit to the City Council. Ah, yes. Now, I know all of you have been to a City Council meeting. From what I've heard, the chambers are always overflowing with people. They have to put closed-circuit television sets outside for the overflow. But for the very few of you who may have missed the City Council meeting, we're going to let Vicki, old Grace, John, and Donna give you just a little peek.
It ain't so much a question of not knowing what to do. We know what's right and wrong like night and day. We hear a lot of stories and we reckon they are true. We knows we've got sometimes to say and nay. We know we mustn't give in a bit. But when we're faced with pleading, we forgive. We're just a bunch who can't say no. We always want to go with the flow. When we want to say Sally! Hi, Sally! Hi,
But what about the men of Los Altos? Who cares? But if we did care, what would the men of Los Altos want? Fame, fortune, a chance to be Madonna's photographer. Well, to answer that question, let's ask Roy and John.
In our yards and our children go to Yale, and oftentimes we wonder why we don't get sent to jail. We got Beamers and Mercedes, we make $1 million deals. What don't we get? We don't get meals.
Well, you just get started and it's almost time to wrap things up. But what would a show be without a finish? A farewell of finale. So let's bring the whole cast back for our big grand finale.